to put it in terms of the structure of white supremacy, and that's somewhat of a misnomer, because white is an invented term, and the designators of various peoples as being of particular colors or hues is also an invention. There was a trial in South Africa. How many of you out here have heard of a guy by the name of Steve Biko? Yeah, pretty good response. Well, at his trial, the judge, who was something of a wit, looked at Biko and he said, "Mr. Biko, why is it they refer to you as black? You look rather like a rich chocolate color to me, something of a brown." And Biko said, "I really don't know. It's not my term. But let me ask you a question in response. Why do they call you white? You look rather pink to me." These do not resonate in the reality of the natural world. They are invented terms. But having been invented, they serve the purpose then of making the assignment of place to various groups of people quite convenient. Race is an invented construction. It does not exist in nature. Black people in the societies of North America have a very clear place. They're kind of a surplus labor force, and insofar as they're surplus or superfluous to the main productive function of the economy of both Canada and the United States, they can, when employed, be employed at a level or a wage level very much below that of their white counterparts. Whites have a place assigned as a group somewhere above that of blacks or browns. Browns are an intermediate strata who stand somewhat above blacks. And then on the other hand, you have the yellows who tend to be imported. You ever heard the term, "ain't got a Chinaman's chance"? They were to be consumed as fodder in the construction of rail lines and mines. Now they've taken hold. They didn't all die in the process of building the transcontinental railroads or digging gold out of the Black Hills or the shaft mines of Pennsylvania or worked to death in the fields of California. But on the other hand, they had a menial and expendable place as well, and that takes us finally to red people. And red people are to disappear. Well, if not quite disappear in a literal sense, although that was the consideration in the late 19th century, to disappear at least figuratively out of sight, out of mind of polite society. It's necessary for each of the groups to remain in its place. It is necessary for the economy to have access to cheap labor, blacks, browns. It is necessary for the economy to have absolutely expendable labor pool that's being brought in for the purpose of being expended at one point in time, yellow people. It's necessary for native people to disappear because the entire structure territorially and in terms of resources of the economy, of the polity, of the two states which are constitutive of the political apparatus of North America are absolutely dependent upon that. A real life native person standing out in public view is automatically a signifier that there might be some sort of a lien or claim upon that which the state depends on you believing is absolutely within its purview, jurisdictionally, functionally, and in every other way you can describe it. So long as people, at least on an overall consensual basis, that there is a general social consensus that this is right, natural, and inevitable, as there have been at various points in the earlier part of the 20th century, there is not a great need for an expansion of the police apparatus, which after all is expensive. A good business manager, a good capitalist will understand that if you can avoid spending money on the acquisition of the personnel and the equipage and the rest of the apparatus for policing society, you can use that money for other purposes which are inevitably more profitable. But things aren't always so tranquil. The same would hold with prisons. So long as there is a relatively low degree of outright resistance to the prevailing order, you see relatively few prisons. They're always there for the scattered few who will deviate from the mold, who need to be made examples of in order to maintain the order or whatever is deemed appropriate by the managers of the overall state, polity, and economy. But what happens when that situation changes? What happens when there is not only a widespread dis-ease with the social order, a discontent that begins to manifest itself not in just an inchoate form of random social responses, I don't know, broken windows, shoplifting, graffiti, these kinds of things, but rather when people begin to understand the nature, the structural nature of their assignment of place, a degrading place, a demeaning place, a dispossessed and disenfranchised place, and on the basis of that understanding begin to get together among themselves in order to attempt to effect some positive transformation in the nature of their existence. Well, then you're going to see this sudden surge in the allocation of resources that would otherwise be invested in more profit-making or profit-driven activities into the apparatus of enforcement. You're going to hear an intensification of the hue and cry for law and order. You're going to see all sorts of pretexts advanced through media, in classrooms, in cafe conversations, justifying, by way of expressing a need for, increased effectiveness and increased presence of police. And the police are there in their capacity to maintain order to do what? Yeah, I know about Amadou Diallo. And they do that. They dispense curbside justice. They beat people to a pulp like Gloves Davis in Chicago some 30 years ago. And those who have followed him in Chicago since, like the LAPD. They engage not only in dispensation of curbside justice in form of corporal punishment to teach a lesson and keep the rabble in line, but they go to the level of Diallo, which is to say, as is becoming apparent in the Ramparts Division of the Los Angeles Police Department, which incidentally, does anybody get the news flash that a judge had cleared litigation against the LAPD on RICO grounds? You know what RICO is. It's a law, a federal law in the United States that was ostensibly designed to combat the 5 families in New York and the rest of the mafia apparatus in the U.S. was used primarily against political targets like, I think it was the Ohio 7, Ray-Luc Lavoisier, and his colleagues. It was used against the resistance conspiracy defendants, saying that in the process of expropriating money to fund political activities, they were engaged in essentially a profit-making enterprise of a criminal nature and were therefore racketeers rather than political activists. And all of a sudden, this judge has cleared the way to proceed against the Los Angeles Police Department as a racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization. First time in history that I know that that's true, that they actually have brought a law to bear against a target that rightly deserves it. That was about 10 days ago that the decision was entered that they could proceed with the litigation. Now, understand it's not going to be successful, but this is a wonderful educational lens for which you can understand the function of police in major cities often. And the basis for this is that they were engaging not only in the dispensation of curbside justice, but that they were assassinating selective targets. They were going out and shooting people to death under color of law, okay, planting weapons on them and so forth, and in the process, enlisting those who had been working. Usually these were what they like to call drug kingpins, which means some guy who's running a drug operation on a city block in South Central LA. They'd kill the head of the organization and basically enlist the people who have been working for them to work for them. They liberate the product, and they're the people who are in charge of the drug sales, the police, and they're profiting from it. They're shaking down small businesses and so on. Well, this is Al Capone type activity, except these guys, rather than wearing gang colors in the sense that we typically understand it, are wearing blue uniforms. Now, blue is Crips. I guess that means the LAPD, all members of the Crip Street Gang. Okay, they got the tattoos and they got the notches. They meet every criteria for their profiling for stopping and frisking and otherwise accosting gang members. They are a gang. A judge has just acknowledged that. Okay? Now, that's one of those little digressions that you can get into.